Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to take part in this debate and indeed to follow the honourable gentleman, who I think has done us all a great service and the nation a great service with the clarity of his speech today, because, Madam Deputy Speaker, the party opposite is often accused of working to serve the producer interest rather than the consumer interest, to look after the needs of the trade unions and not that of the ordinary citizen, or in this case, the child. But rarely, Madam Deputy Speaker, does any member opposite make it quite so explicit as the speech we've just heard. A total betrayal of the child, a total focus on the needs of the professional, their interests, their pay, their disparities, their conditions. Nothing about the child, nothing about the standards of education. Never, Madam Deputy Speaker, have I seen a Labour member speak up so honestly about what this bill is really about. So I think we should all be enormously grateful to him for doing that, and doing it so clearly and in not many words. Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill contains 38 policy proposals, all linked by a troubling theme: the misguided notion that the bureaucrat knows best. In advocating for new schools to be opened and controlled by local authorities, the government chooses to ignore the evidence that competition and innovation are the things that drive up standards, and instead they consolidate power in the hands of bureaucrats. This bill also undermines the rights of parents to determine what is best for their children's education, whether it be attending school or being home educated. Far from empowering schools, which, until the honourable gentleman came along, ministers have tried to pretend this bill does, this bill imposes a centralised, outdated version of education that stifles choice and which will reverse 14 years of progress. But actually it's more than that, it's 25 years of progress, Madam Deputy Speaker, because as I referred to earlier in an intervention, it was 2000 that the then Labour Prime Minister announced the Academy's programme. I think it was 2002 the first City Academy opened. It's a quarter of a century of progress, in which time, demonstrably by every known measure of performance, schools in Wales have fallen behind schools in England practising these appalling academy policies, which have led to such an improvement for the child. Which, notwithstanding the doubtless, I mean, the honourable gentleman's speech was quite remarkable, but I would hope there are members opposite who aren't so tied up in their trade union engagement, their producer interest capture, that they could actually focus on the interests of young people. Because, I mean, when the right honourable friend and I, and members opposite, served on the Education Committee, which I chaired, we were horribly aware that the policies that we were helping scrutinise and influence would have an impact for decades to come on lives. So actually, in many ways, more fundamental than the economic policies pursued by a government at any time. At least they're more easily altered. But you close down the opportunities for disadvantaged children, and that will be having a negative impact on them, on their families, on their community, and indeed on this country for decades to come. And that is why it is such a bad idea. Let me give way to the honourable lady.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way, but does he not agree with me that when the system is currently meaning that a third of our children leave school without the basic qualifications to succeed in life, that there is a failure in the current system and it does need change, and furthermore that in the communities with the most disadvantage, and I mean outside of London, the academisation approach has not made an impact and has not turned the life chances around of those children who are literally growing up in the most deprived wards.
Listen to her.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I apologise. I have worked in those communities and with those schools and seen the impact of trust after trust failing those children. I will not accept that. And does the honourable gentleman also agree with me that that's not acceptable and we have to move forward from this day to make increased improvements to make sure the most disadvantaged students genuinely get the opportunities they deserve?
Well, I thank the honourable lady for her speech, if not intervention. And I certainly applaud her passion for the interests of children and disadvantaged children in particular, and her rage at failings in the system, and her desire to see improvements made to it, which might need to be radical. But we haven't heard how the mechanics of the changes proposed in this bill will raise standards. They will, in fact, dismantle it. And it comes in the Honourable Lady's intervention comes in the context of my following the Honourable Gentleman talking about Wales. And you can see the system which is being created by this bill is much more akin to that in Wales, exactly as the Honourable Gentleman so honestly said. And does the Honourable Lady suggest that deprived children in Wales have better outcomes than they do in England? She moved to stand up, but then decided and thought better of it, which I think was wise of her, because she knows that the situation in Wales, which, as the Honourable Gentleman said, is exactly what this bill is trying to create, is infinitely worse than it is in England. Whatever the failings of the system in England, it is demonstrably better than it was 15 or indeed 25 years ago, and it's demonstrably better than it is in Wales. But I'll happily give way to the Honourable Lady again.
Interventor should be short, Senator Smith.
Thank you, the Honourable Gentleman, for giving way once again. In the most recent conversation I had with a group of my head teachers, not one of them raised concerns about this section and the reforms that are being made, because for them, the question of academisation and actually how the amendments have been made are not going to limit them in their capability to do the best for their children. What they are concerned about, and it has been mentioned from across the House, are issues that will come forward beyond this around SEND and other things that are restricting them from making progress.
Well, again, I thank the Honourable Lady for that intervention, but she again couldn't explain anything about the bill. Her passion for improvement was great. We'd all applaud that. But her linkage to anything in this bill that's actually going to improve matters, that is absolutely distinctly missing. And so many people, from Sir John Coles of United Learning, have criticised these proposals in the bill, because effectively he said it would destroy the academy system. I couldn't quite tell where the Honourable Lady is on that, but the Honourable Gentleman, as I say, spoke with great clarity. Where once Labour promised us education, 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 now they promise us bureaucracy, bureaucracy, bureaucracy. Yeah. And tragically, it's our children who will bear the consequences. And the outcomes of the last Labour government serve as a stark warning for where this bill will lead. Because in 2010, notwithstanding the nascent academy movement, we inherited a country where our children ranked 27th globally in reading. We spent more on education than Germany, yet achieved results that lagged behind nations like Poland. By the time we left office, Madam Deputy Speaker, England's students were ranked as the best readers in the Western world. In 2010, just 68% of schools were rated good or outstanding. Today, that figure is 90%. And these dramatic improvements didn't happen by accident, Madam Deputy Speaker. They are the result of a system which puts freedom, competition and accountability at the centre of education. And, equally importantly, leaves mediocrity nowhere to hide. If the Conservative education reforms were great, it was only because we were standing on the shoulders of giants. I quote, "Academies were introduced in the areas of greatest challenge, harnessing the drive of external sponsors and strong school leadership to bring new hope to our most disadvantaged areas." Not my words, Madam Deputy Speaker, but that of the longest-serving Labour Prime Minister, Sir Tony Blair, in 2005. And to his credit, he recognised the failings of our country's overly centralised education system, and he started the reforms which paved the way to make our schools great again. From tiny acorns do mighty oaks grow, and that's what the Conservatives delivered. In 14 years, the number of children attending academies skyrocketed from 192,000 to 4.9 million. This was transformative for pupils across England, particularly those living in deprived communities. One example I will pick is Harris Academy, Battersea, formerly known as Battersea Park School. It was considered inadequate before joining the Harris Federation in 2014. At that time, 68% of students achieved 5 or more GCSEs at grades A to C, A star to C. By 2017, this figure had risen to 83%. And in 2018, Ofsted rated the academy as outstanding, noting that teachers were proud to work there, morale was high, and pupils of all abilities made very strong progress. By putting a strong emphasis on cultural enrichment and academic excellence, the life chances of the working class pupils that they predominantly teach and who Labour claim to represent were transformed. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am pleased that the Government, and congratulate the Minister, has seen sense on one issue and amended the bill to stop the extension of national pay rules to academies and only require academies to have due regard to the school teacher's pay and conditions document rather than impose a ceiling on pay, as this would have undermined the remarkable progress made by these institutions in raising standards, particularly for disadvantaged pupils. New Clause 38 goes one step further, making the pay set out in the school teacher's pay and conditions document a flaw and extending freedoms over pay and conditions to maintained schools. One of the strengths of academies is their ability to respond flexibly to local needs, including offering competitive salaries to attract and retain the best teachers in challenging areas, and limiting this flexibility would ignore the realities of teacher recruitment and retention, especially in communities where the need for high-quality education is greatest. Because people respond to incentives, Madam Deputy Speaker, and if academies can't pay the best maths or physics teacher more than the children who would benefit from their skills the most, they will be left behind. Building on the need for greater freedom and flexibility to raise standards, we introduced free schools, an initiative that helped spark a renaissance in English education, walking hand in hand with their union paymasters who decry these schools as unaccountable and underfunded, as we had set out in the previous speech. Labour want these engines of social mobility to be destroyed. Their proposal to allow local authorities to open new schools, along with their planned review of the free school programme, would shift control of our children's education away from communities and teachers and back into the hands of bureaucrats. And unfortunately, Madam Deputy Speaker, the process has already started. In October, ministers paused plans to open 44 new state schools in England, putting parents of children who plan to send their children there in limbo. So I'm pleased to support New Clause 39, which would reverse this pause and allow those schools to open as planned. So let's be clear. In 2024, 21% of GCSE entries from free schools achieved a grade 7 or above, compared with 19% in comprehensive schools. Labour may not want to face the facts, Madam Deputy Speaker, but the reality is this. Sometimes the bureaucrat and the trade union shop steward does not know best. The Secretary of State is Labour's Miss Trunchbull, putting our teachers in the choker to satisfy her union paymasters. Finally, this government is so certain in its belief that it knows best, they won't even allow the parents of the freedom to educate their own children without state interference. Buried within this bill is a new legal requirement for local authorities to maintain a register of children not in school, a policy which I recognise was in the Conservative Party's manifesto, but which has, in my view, the potential not just to be unhelpful, but actively harmful to children. Our country has long upheld the primacy of parents, not the state, in determining the best education for their children, a fundamental covenant that this proposal seeks to undermine. And that's why I do support Amendment 200, which requires a local authority to submit a statement of reasons when they do not agree for a child to be taken out of school to be home educated. They should at least have to account for themselves. Compulsory enrolment could have serious consequences, as families may simply refuse to comply and potentially disengage from state involvement altogether because of this overreach, leading to negative unintended consequences that could impact the child's well-being. The state thinks it has a divine right to infringe on every aspect of the child's life, or at least this government does. They want to know what home-educated children do at the weekends and during the holidays. If that information is not required for children who attend mainstream schools, what's the justification for demanding it for children who are homeschooled? And why could the Minister not, in my, I think, repeated interventions, provide any reassurance that we would have some sensible and proportionate rules put in place? I therefore support Amendment 197 to this bill, which will remove this requirement. Madam Deputy Speaker, it was John Maynard Keynes who said, "When the facts change, I change my mind." In the same spirit, I ask colleagues across the chamber what they do. The evidence is clear. Freedom and flexibility in education does drive up standards and delivers better outcomes for children. In government, we followed the evidence and built on the previous Labour government's body of work, and the results speak for themselves. England now has the best readers in the Western world, a record number of schools rated good or outstanding, and greater opportunities for working class children, albeit never at the level we would like, which is why it needs to be built on, not knocked to the ground. As proud as I am of our record, Madam Deputy Speaker, this debate isn't about party politics. At its heart, it's about ensuring that every child, regardless of their background, has access to the highest quality education that we can provide. So I urge the Secretary of State to follow the evidence, not ideology. I will vote against this bill, but given the government's majority, of course, we accept that however misguided these policies are, they will probably pass. So all I can do is finish by appealing to colleagues across the chamber. Show courage, stand up for the poorest in society, stop the wreckers, and support our amendments this evening when we come to vote.